I'm Matt, host of My Second Self and I on the Podmouth Media Network. I'm only asking for a couple minutes of your time so I can shamelessly tell you about my podcast. My Second Self and I is a unique podcast because instead of an actual other person, Alex, my co-host, is the audible manifestation of one of the many other voices in my head. Sounds weird, but it kinda works. Well, sure, that sounds interesting, you might be thinking, but you might also be thinking, well, what kind of pod is it, Matt? My Second Self and I is a comedy show about true crime. What? How does that work? I believe that with the right tone of voice, different voices, and good storytelling, that even a gruesome story about a serial killer can be told in a way that doesn't leave you feeling gritty or gross. Don't worry, I can see you scratching your head. I understand the murder isn't the funny part, rather it's how I tell the story that gets you to laugh. So, what kind of stories can we expect? Great question. You can expect anything from serial killers, missing persons, cold cases, conspiracy theories, paranormal entities, cults, and pretty much anything within the general vicinity of weird/unexplainable is on the table. You can also expect a certain level of professionalism in that I will do my very best to present the most accurate information I can, as well as being entertaining and engaging. If that sounds like a good time to you, you can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts. My Second Self and I. Tell your friends and stay kind.
Find other great podcasts like this one at podmoth.network.
The following podcast discusses adult situations and gets very sweary. Sensitive ears beware. You're listening to the Fuck My Work Life podcast, where the work stories are real, the laughs are contagious, and all of us can agree that work sucks.
Welcome back, fuckers, to the Fuck My Work Life podcast. We are here with a special guest. I always say tonight, but this, whenever you're listening to it, we've got a special guest on this episode. I have been listening to his podcast for a while now. I think I just stumbled across it on Good Pods at one point and started listening. But we are excited to have Eric from the Eric Likes Animals podcast with us here tonight. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming on. I'm very excited. I think when I reached out to you, I'm like, I love animals and it'd be cool to have you on.
Well, I'm definitely very excited. You guys are my first guest appearance, so I promise I won't say I love you too much by the end and won't constantly text and call you constantly. But, so I'll make sure to rein it in.
Well, that's exciting. We're your first guest spot. Now you're going to get hooked and you're just going to want to be on all the podcasts.
Now you're going to blow up.
Well, I mean, I love talking animals.
It's also nice to be a guest on a podcast too, because you just record and then go your merry way and you don't have to do any of the editing or anything. It's quite fun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was like, I talk and I don't have to edit and hear my own voice constantly. Yeah, this is great.
Thank you again for joining us. So before we get into what you do, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah. So I've started this podcast called Eric Likes Animals. I think I've been going for about a year now, and it's just me talking about animals, environmental news. I really try and be well-rounded, and I try and really hit a lot of the animals that may not get represented enough. And I really try and hit on animals that a lot of people may not know about, as well as I also try and rotate through that I'm not just constantly talking about a mammal or reptile or amphibian, talking about bugs and fish and all that good stuff, and just kind of my experiences, because I'm a zookeeper. Surprise. So I worked with a number of the animals I talk about. Of course, I talk about a lot of others as well. Real quick, also on this podcast, I have to just say that I'm here as an independent. I do still work at a facility. I am going to share some thoughts and have some opinions. And of course, that doesn't reflect on the facility I currently work at. So, yeah.
The not to be named facility.
Yes. Not that I have any problems with it or anything like that. That's just what most keepers do when they go on to a podcast.
Yeah, it's better to be safe than sorry, right? You don't want to upset your employers.
No, but they're great.
You are a zookeeper. How, did you want to do that from early on, or was it something you just kind of came into?
I was kind of born into it, actually. My mom was actually a vet tech at the Philadelphia Zoo when I was born.
Oh,
So
wow.
actually, when I was first born, she was actually raising an orphan kangaroo at the same time. So somehow that got ingrained in my brain that that's what I wanted to do. She eventually had to give it up to take care of me, which I thought was a horrible decision. I mean, the human child or working with cool animals, but no, she's great and she loves her current job and all that. And I got to then go to all these facilities, meet all these keepers, like as a toddler. So I knew right off the bat what it truly meant to be a zookeeper, especially at a major facility such as, well, Philadelphia Zoo and a number of other facilities across the country.
That's awesome. Wow.
Philadelphia Zoo is that's a pretty big zoo, right? Isn't that? Where's the zoo where that famous guy worked?
If you're talking about Jack Hanna, that's Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
That's the Columbus, Ohio Zoo. Philadelphia Zoo's big claim is that they're the first zoo of America.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that true? They were the first zoo ever?
There's
in America?
There's definitely some arguments out there between, I think, them and Bronx, but they are saying that because I guess technically they were around, but I think something along the lines of the Civil War like messed up their opening date, but they were still there. So there was like, depending on which zoo you talk to, there's some arguments there, but they're pretty much recognized as the first zoo.
So there's some like zoo wars happening behind the scenes.
Secret zoo wars, yes.
So do you have a specific specialty, like certain animals that you work with mostly, or are you just kind of all over the place, working with everyone?
Yeah, I'm kind of the random guy. I definitely could never really choose a specific animal to work with. So where I currently work at, I work with a wide range of animals where I'm working with mammals, I'm working with birds, I'm working with reptiles. So like sand cats, which was an animal that I covered on the podcast. They're really amazing, but I also work with kookaburras and desert tortoises and pancake tortoises, brush-tailed batong, mouse lemurs, like just a wide variety there. And then, of course, I worked at another facility where it was a smaller facility, so I actually got to rotate through. And there I worked with things like jaguars, mountain lions, bison, elk, giraffe, zebra, American alligators. So I think at one point I tried to calculate it out, and I think I've worked with over 600 different species of animals.
Wow.
Probably
That's
a little
so
more.
cool, though.
Yeah. And I mean, each one so unique and so much fun.
Yeah. If I had my life to do over, that's what I would do.
So you went to school for like what, zoology?
Yeah, so like I kind of keep saying, I really appreciate modern zoos. So there's something called the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and they're a overseeing body or accreditation process here in North America. And it's this really cool thing that not a lot of facilities are a part of because they have very high standards. I actually have my notes here because I'm terrible with numbers. So currently they are the highest accreditation process in North America. There's only 238 facilities in the entire North America area. And that includes facilities in 46 states and 13 countries. And once you're part of AZA, it's not like a done deal. Every 5 years, there's a whole team of people, not from your zoo, vets, researchers in the wild, all that sort of stuff, come to your facility and literally look at it with a magnifying glass and looking across every single aspect of it. And being one of those more modern facilities, one of the big requirements that they have is, let's be real, zoo and zookeeper is a pretty loose term right now. I mean, the guy that has a bear in his gas station or something, it's the local zoo and he's the zookeeper. Kind of thing. But to work at an AZA facility, you need a minimum of a bachelor's degree, which I have a bachelor's degree from Delaware Valley University in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where I studied zoo science. But you could have biology, environmental science, and even psychology due to the behavioral studies that are going on in the wild and, of course, in captivity as well. And then normally you need 2 years of internships, part-time work. And then if you want to work at any of the bigger facilities, you need a couple years of full-time a lot of times AZA accredited zoo experience to get in there as well. Sometimes, if you don't have too many applicants, but there's someone with non-AZA facility experience, but it's a good non-AZA zoo, because sometimes there are a lot of good non-AZA facilities. It's just that the money requirements, because they are making sure that the facility looks like it could financially withstand a lot of different things. They don't want a zoo to have all these animals and not be financially stable.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, and AZA facilities cover a wide range. Like, some of them are not even open to the public, sanctuaries, science centers, all that sort of stuff. Basically, if there's a facility with animals, you could look up if they're an AZA facility. And then it's just kind of peace of mind when you go there, even though they're smaller facilities. And yeah, they might not look as fancy as San Diego, Bronx, Philly, North Carolina, Cincinnati, St. Louis, or whatever. But they're there for a bigger picture, and that's conservation and education, and they're part of a bigger picture.
So at least, I'm trying to math right now, at least like 6 to 8 years to get to actually being a quote unquote zookeeper, zoologist. Is that the right a term or is that a specific?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of facilities have started workshopping the name, because zookeeper has been so loosely used for anybody. But zoologist is an accurate description, especially now with most zookeepers are somehow involved with a conservation breeding program, a behavioral study, or some other sort of study. And they had many of these people literally have degrees that a wildlife biologist who is actively working in the wildlife field would have, or anyone who's working in a biolab. There were some people that were in my class that went the biolab and route and are looking at bacteria and doing all that sort of stuff. So zoologist, biologist, animal caretaker, but zookeeper is still widely used.
So wait a minute. You're telling me that I can't just be like Matt Damon and go buy one?
No, and that's based off of a British zoo, so not here in the States.
Yeah, those Brits.
They get away with everything over there.
They have their own accreditation process and all that. But yeah, I mean, you can go and buy a zoo here in North America, and each state has their own different regulations and all that. And I mean, a non-AZA facility can become an AZA facility. And if you're ever interested, you can always check out the Association of Zoos and Aquariums website, where they're pretty open about what it takes to be one of their facilities. They have the manuals on what they require at the facility to have, say, a red panda. I worked with a red panda at my last facility, and they don't just hand them out even to a facility that have accredited keepers and are an AZA facility. We actually had to actively send someone to a conference to get trained so that they felt approved to send such a valuable animal. And there's a lot of animals you won't see out of AZA facilities because they're not actually owned by the zoo. They're owned by the breeding programs or
countries
around the world. So red panda is a good example. Giant pandas are another good example. A lot of people wonder why we don't have more of those, but that's because they're owned by China, and normally it costs a pretty penny because we have to rent them. And even if we have babies here, they're not ours. And all that money goes back to the panda conservation program over there. So, I mean, it's still for conservation, but you need to dedicate a lot of money for something like that.
Yeah. Are the red pandas also owned by China?
No, and a lot of there are some Chinese red pandas, but a lot of them are Nepal. A lot of them are kind of owned more through what is called the Red Panda SSP program. SSP stands for Species Survival Plan. It is something that is part of AZA, which means that depending on the program, there's either one, or if it's like elephants or something, there's like 10 people on this program. And it's eHarmony for accredited zoos. They basically tell us where to send animals, who should breed with who. They do take in what zoos are saying, like, no, this animal's really old, or I don't think it will get along with another female or something, because they're looking at the genetics and they're trying to figure out exactly what they want to do. But it still comes down to the facilities. And if they get sent somewhere and the pairing doesn't work out, then they'll find a new pairing somewhere else. And it brings up a good point too, where a lot of times for that situation, those zoos aren't buying those animals. They're part of a breeding program. For most accredited facilities, animals don't leave then accredited facilities unless they're going back into the wild or some sort of specialized reason. Like a lot of elephants went to the, the Elephant Tennessee Sanctuary kind of thing, which works a lot with AZA facilities. So what would happen is a lot of zoos just don't breed because they're part of the programs. If they're told not to breed, they're not going to breed. So if you go to a facility and you're like, well, there's no babies, so it must be a bad zoo. Well, they just might not have a single breeding recommendation right now. And if they do, they're not making any extra money. I mean, people will show up. Trust me, I've seen plenty of people show up for baby sandcats and baby jaguars and all that sort of stuff. Definitely there's more people coming, which means more tickets bought. But then when we send them to other facilities, that facility only pays for the transportation of the animal because they're part of the breeding program. And sometimes they're owned by the facility themselves, depending on the animal. But a lot of times they're then just donated to the other facility or they're part of the SSP program. So it's really just shifting their own animals across the country.
So complicated.
Well, yeah.
Have you ever got to travel to other countries with your zoo work?
So I haven't currently gotten to travel anywhere with my zoo work. I've done a lot of stuff, kind of native conservation kind of stuff, where helping out native amphibians and things like that. I was originally part of the Frog Watch chapter at my last facility, and that was a citizen science program where it had volunteers going out and listening for frogs and different amphibians to get a better calculation on what's going on with the amphibian populations across North America right now, especially with things like chytrid fungus, which are wiping out a number of species.
There's a lot of stuff you see. I mean, obviously, a lot of it is human related, but how much of it is that just like, people bringing in, I guess that's also still human related, but, like foreign species coming into areas and like what has the bigger impact?
It's all equal and it's all humans one way or another. I would say that some of the biggest diseases right now, like we have wasting disease in North America with a lot of the deer population, and that's pretty devastating right now. Chytrid fungus is a big one. I mean, whole species have been wiped out due to chytrid fungus. And then you have white nose syndrome or white nose fungus that happens on bats. And they were actually able to track that fungus to a spelunking conference, where spelunking, diving into caves and all that, from a group of Europeans that came over to, I think it was somewhere in Central and South America, a spelunking conference. And of course, they went spelunking when they were at this conference, but their shoes still had particles from Europe. So they had the fungus on there, and then it spread. And white nose fungus isn't something that the fungus itself is technically the killer. What is happening is that the fungus is waking bats up early from hibernation. So it wasn't really affecting any of the tropical bats that might not hibernate or anything like that. But any of the ones that do hibernate, like a big one was the little brown bat. And the little brown bat would wake up early from hibernation. And during hibernation, their digestive system slows down, their body slows down, and by waking up, all of a sudden it speeds up. And all of a sudden they're getting hungry when they're not supposed to be hungry. And then they're going out in the wintertime when there's no bugs and starving to death. Aww. I mean, 90% of little brown bat populations in different areas basically got wiped out due to this fungus, because then people were walking into caves themselves and not knowing that they were trekking stuff in there. Yeah. And then, of course, one bat brings it in. It's a fungus. Like one little spore gets in there. I mean, we've all probably watched The Last of Us. Fungus is a pretty dangerous thing when it gets unleashed into a population. And unfortunately, they've talked about it, where one of the biggest reasons why they didn't completely list them as endangered is by listing them as endangered, it would pretty much shut down any sort of construction or manufacturing anywhere that hasn't already, because they're just all over. Like, I'm from Pennsylvania. Fracking of oil would pretty much cease any sort of logging. And like, that's that's a huge amount of money for people that wouldn't survive without it. Now, they're doing a lot better. They've shut off caves. If you ever go to a cave and there's these weird bars and you're like, wait, I thought I could walk in there, but they've literally barred off these caves so people
Wow.
couldn't go in, but the bats could easily fly in and out of. And a little
Yeah.
brown bat, by the way, fun fact, they eat about 4,000 mosquitoes a night. So
Oh, wow.
losing a population like that, that's why there's a lot more
Yeah.
mosquitoes out there.
Oh, yeah. Ugh.
And there's only one species of bat in the world that drinks blood, and they're down in Central and South America, and they hate human blood, or may I say the only bat that drinks mammal blood. There's 2 others that only drink bird blood for whatever reason, but only one species that drink mammal blood. And as I always say, because I do work with vampire bats, bats around the world do way more for keeping your blood in your body than taking it out. Also, you're not going to turn into Dracula. Although I think
What?
there's a lot of humans right now that would want to turn into Dracula thanks
Right.
to the Twilight books and all of those different movies and stuff out there. They're like, oh, man.
Being a vampire is cool.
What? I thought I would take a trip.
I love bats. Bats are so cute.
They're so cool. I know I'm going to get real simple. I love the
It's simple,
videos where
isn't
they
it? I love it.
where they turn the camera upside down in like the bat cages
Mhm.
and it looks like the bats are dancing at night.
Oh, yeah.
I love those videos.
Do you know when the only time a bat will flip itself right side up? To pee and poop. They will actually
That
hang
makes
from their
sense.
thumbs from the cave so that they won't drip on their face. They like to do it on me, but they won't do it on themselves. So,
Yeah.
walking into a cave of 70 vampire bats, that's the grossest thing that happens is you'll get peed and pooped on, but there's no way they're coming anywhere near me.
There's definitely a smell. What are the bats that they have at the safari park? Are they
Oh, I have no idea. It's been so long since you've been able to go in
I
there since
know.
COVID.
Yeah, I
They
haven't
shut
been
it all down.
But they're
Yeah.
just they're like the cute. They look like the little flying kittens. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they're so cute.
I mean, there's a lot of them out there, but I'm trying to think with them what it would be. I mean, I worked with something called African straw-colored fruit bats, and that's a pretty popular one in zoos. And they're kind of a bigger bat species.
Yeah. I feel like it's some sort of fruit
yeah,
bat.
it might be a fruit bat. Yeah.
Yeah, and man, those fruit bats can have a personality.
They're so
Yeah.
cute. I love them.
I worked with one named Candy Cane, and boy, if you didn't get the food in there quick enough, he would come right up to where the door was when you entered, and he would just scream right in your face that you were late. He was the leader of the group, and he let you know it.
That's awesome. I'm so jealous. Oh
I know.
man.
I would
I
love
hate my job.
yeah, I would love to work with animals. I'm just afraid I would get too emotional when like bad shit happens.
Yeah.
Well,
it's-
And it's just
mean-
like having pets.
Yeah, well, and there's something going around in the zoo field right now. It's it's always been there, but they put names to it. And I think you might have talked about it on your podcast before, maybe passion fatigue.
Yeah.
Which is the concept that when you're in such a passionate field that they always make you, they're like, hey, listen, we understand you want to do 120% for these animals. You don't see them as pets. You see them as coworkers. You see them as this is the species that you're going to save. And that's the only reason why they're here. So you're doing 120%. And then they just get burnt out. And I mean, there's been a lot of dark things for some people, not really so much because of the facilities that they work in. It's just that some people just get so down with all of the stuff happening in the world, which is also why, if you haven't noticed, most of my environmental news stories, I really try and talk about positive environmental news stories or funny environmental news stories, like the spider mite that rips off the female skin with his mouth before he mates them. I know you like that one on the podcast, so I do try and find the more positive, fun ones, because I'm a big believer that if we stop looking at all the negatives and start looking at all the positives and start also understanding what is going on in the world and why people are making these decisions, we'll be able to achieve actual conservation. Because now so many people are like, oh, this one's a coal miner, so we must hate them because they don't want to save the environment or anything like that. And living up in Pennsylvania and being with those coal areas and homes and cities and towns, it's not that simple.
Right.
No, it's not.
It's the livelihood of
You
like
can
a
starve,
huge
or you can go do
population.
something that maybe you don't even want to do,
Yeah.
but you have to.
Exactly. I mean, do you think coal miners wake up every morning and they're like, man, I'm jazzed for coal. I'm really excited to breathe in some stuff. I'm excited to dig up the
I can't
dirt.
wait for that black lung.
Yeah, I love the black
got the black
lung.
lung, pa. But I mean, most of them, it's the simple concept that they live in a town, and I mean, a lot of them may be living in a house that's generational. So think of something that's been passed down through your family, and all of a sudden you're being told you can't live there because you're not allowed to mine coal, and then you're supposed to sell a home in a dying town to someone else. That it's not that simple. And then most of the conservation stuff that's out there, it's we're going to take coal mining away from this town, but we're going to make the solar power factories 3 states over, and if you want those jobs, you can get the heck over there with no money, probably starving already. And I mean, you also see a lot of these towns too where there's chemicals in their water or something like that. It's not an easy life, but what can they do? I mean, we do conservation around the world where it's like whale sharks. Major thing we solved with them, we gave people other jobs in that village, but we couldn't do the same for whatever reason. We're like, oh, they're Americans. They can just move. They have money. For whatever reason, we just don't have that same compassion for our own people.
I mean, it's all about capitalism and the almighty dollar. Like that coal's making somebody money somewhere, and so can't stop.
Yeah.
I brought the mood down.
I got pooped on by a lot of things. I can talk about getting pooped on by a lot of things. I've been pooped on. There's one day I got hit in the balls 3 times. It's an exciting field to work in. Some days it's great. Other days you come in so hurt and you're just like, my gosh, what did I do today?
I mean, it sounds amazing.
Oh yeah. Every day is different, and it's, I mean, and sometimes that animal is the reason why you're excited, but also they can be the one that you're just shaking your head and you're like, gosh darn this freaking animal right now, causing all this trouble. Just clean this stall, and for whatever reason, they made poop rainbows overnight.
Have you ever got to hold a baby lion?
No. Most of the big cats in AZA facilities, we really try and be as hands off as possible with that kind of stuff. I mean, the only times would be if medical checks or something like that, but we've always found it to be a lot better with that. And the concept that a lot of people like to use is, well, don't you want to be part of that family? Like, don't you want the animals to feel like you're part of that family? No, I'd rather be as an outside person that may supply things, a resource, but not the family, because a lot of animal families are pretty messed up, and you don't want to be seen as part of that, or else they're not going to listen to you, or some weird stuff also happens. That's for sure. I mean, lions is a good example. I mean, let's be honest, they're probably the most social species of cat out there. Although in captivity, a number of very antisocial cats do get along because the threat of food competition isn't there. And there's a lot of things keepers do to prevent that. Like with a male and a female sand cat, they're very antisocial in the wild. We would separate them, make sure they get plenty of food so that they do not feel like that food competition will make them fight over that, because number one thing is eating, and then comes all the other stuff. But for lions, they're kind of social. I mean, if a new male lion were to come into the pride out in the wild and take over the pride, the first thing he does, sorry, this is going to get a little graphic, murder all the children.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Straight up,
because they're not his.
House.
Wow.
They're not his. And the secret to what life is passing off genetics. And the male will come in and he's not going to take care of cubs that aren't his genetics, that will also most likely try and over succeed him, because his goal is that someone related to him would overthrow him eventually. And also by doing that, all the females are, well, ready for kids again.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Social, not social.
Wow.
Yeah. Social, but on a very dark scale.
Well, I mean, it's the animal kingdom, right? It's kind of like that, just basic survival mode, right? Like I must
It's
be
like Star Wars. There's the light side and
Yeah.
the dark side, and both have to kind of coexist together to have unity, so to speak.
Yeah. It's like all the nature shows where it's like, we're following this beautiful gazelle around and learning all about its life. And then it's like, but uh-oh, in the distance, the lion is watching. And you're just like, no.
Let's get you emotionally involved with both of these animals, where it's like, oh, if the gazelle survives, the lion dies. But if the lion
Right.
survives, the gazelle dies. This is great. This is really good for our emotional states right now.
I know.
Yeah.
It's funny. They do that perfectly. They just
I've
mess
seen
with
The
you.
Lion King, that goddamn movie.
Face it, dating sucked in your 20s, gets worse in your 30s, and your 40s, forget it.
It's a cesspool out there, and we're your flotation device.
Join us weekly for saucy chat, ridiculous love gurus,
And MILF-worthy fun to spice up your life.
the MILF and Me podcast. Every Wednesday on your favorite pod platform.
And the MILFandMePod.com.
The MILF and Me podcast.
So what is the coolest animal that you've got to work with?
Ooh. I mean, I'm pretty excited that I work with sandcats right now. They're not really one that's represented in a lot of facilities. I will have to say, though, that I didn't get to work with it, but I did get to meet one, which is a pangolin. And that was probably one of the coolest creatures I got to at least meet, just because of how endangered they are. And they're just really unique, weird animals. And I like the weird ones, let's be real.
Yeah, one of my really good friends has a dress with pangolins all over it. So
Oh,
it's
really?
funny.
What does a
Yeah.
pangolin look like?
It's kind of an armadillo and an anteater made a baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
So
got like the
a-
hard shell, right?
yeah,
Like an
so
armadillo.
They have,
Yeah,
like,
I think I know what you're talking
scales.
about.
And the cool thing is, like, anteaters, like their tongue is so long that it's kind of like attached to their neck. But like pangolins have such long tongues that it is actually attached all the way to their hip.
Oh my
And
god.
that's just so, well, you got to make room for it. It doesn't just fold up into pieces like origami.
Yeah.
They need a kind of a channel, and that's so that they can get deep in those termite mounds. And that's why it's so hard, because so far copying termite diet kind of regulations, because it's very, I mean, a lot of people are like, termites are everywhere. It's not as easy as you think to like propagate. Like, we're able to breed
Yeah.
crickets and ants and cockroaches and all those live bugs to feed a lot of animals. But getting the termite thing down has always been difficult, but it's actually getting a lot better. And there's facilities like, I think Prague Zoo just had a baby Chinese pangolin, and it's the first baby Chinese pangolin born, I think, outside of China, which is like a huge deal. Like,
Oh,
the
wow.
only reason, because obviously Chinese pangolins can just have outside pens in China, and they breed really well, and they can
Yeah.
gather food from around their habitat to bring in.
Yeah.
So having that kind of success is like really, really cool. And I mean, the zoo field is constantly evolving and growing. And I have to say, one of the coolest things about it is the fact that, unlike any other business, I'll give you an example. If Toyota all of a sudden made a battery that went for 20,000 miles and charged in 30 minutes, there is no way in hell they are going to share that information with any other group, not Tesla, not Ford, nobody.
Yeah.
They are not, they're keeping that secret. But if a zoo breeds this super endangered animal, and it might bring all this media and all this donations and just all this press, they're already out there screaming to all the other zoos how they did
Yeah.
it. Like, there is
Wow.
no secrets between zoos on how to do it better. And that's just such a cool thing. And I think it
Yeah.
really helps. And it's more than just AZA facilities. I mean, there's a number of different conferences that zoos, non-AZA and AZA will go to, and they're just constantly sharing ideas. There's magazines. There's probably like 30 or 40 conferences throughout the year that, depending on what you're passionate about, like if you really like reptiles and amphibians, you go to HerpTag conference, which is a week-long thing about all the best zoos coming together, talking about everything reptiles and amphibians, sharing all this information to try and help out people in their own facility based off of what they had experienced.
I think when it comes to like animal conservation, it's really good to hear that, because everything everything, like with everything that's going on in the world today and has been for decades now, to know that the people that are getting into conserving animals care about the animals.
Yeah.
They don't care about the competition.
No.
That it's not about the competition of we're on this team and they're on that team, and so if we figure something out, we're not telling them because we want to be the only one. It's about the survival of the species of that animal, and it's really, it shows you that there's still a lot of good people out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we see much of anymore, because it's, nowadays it's just, sorry, I'm going to bring the mood down too.
Bring
Nowadays
it down. I'll
it's
try and
just-
bring it back up with a fun animal story.
Nowadays it's just, how can we tear this down, to make ourselves feel
Or
better.
who can we step on to get ourselves higher?
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's kind of the reason why I also wanted to be a zookeeper, is obviously my mom being in the zoo field, and my dad was super passionate about nature and environment stuff as well. I mean, he kind of had to, since he married my mom. So he had to be a big animal, nature, environmental lover as well. And they, no matter what said, I always kind of had this animal goal, and I really got into conservation. And then I realized that most of the conservation stuff that was happening out there is either federally funded or state funded or township funded or accredited zoos for the most part. Like, they were one of the bigger ones, and also job security. There was a couple other groups out there, but it wasn't guaranteed forever. And there are some great ones out there as well. And then also, as I saw it, I can do conservation work. So I can be on the front lines there. I can be on the front lines educating the public at my facilities, talking to literally millions of people each year. I have an opportunity to have a stage where I can talk to 1 million people each year, as well as, unfortunately, being the last line of defense, because there's so many species that actually were only found in accredited zoos. Black-footed ferrets, fantastic example. I've never done a black-footed ferret one, so I'll give you a little bit of information about them. They're a native North American species, and they were actually believed to be extinct. Then one day, farmer's dog named Shep. Yep, I know the dog's name because we had a ferret then named Shep. Brought this dead ferret to his owner, and his owner was like, "Oh shit, this looks important. I've never seen this creature before." So he then contacted U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they're like, "Oh shit, that is important." Came out, looked around, found 7 black-footed ferrets left in existence. And they decided, U.S. Fish and Wildlife did, that we could not leave that species to fend for themselves out there, because they were going extinct due to the poisoning of black-tailed prairie dogs. It's a species that they only ate black-tailed prairie dogs, and animals that are so specific like that are normally the ones that have the hardest time, because they were creating holes that ranchers' cattle were going in. So they were just killing all the prairie dogs, which then in turn affected the ferrets. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife brought them in, zoos started breeding them, and now we have thousands of black-footed ferrets now, thanks to accredited facilities. And then there's also things like the Panamanian golden frog, thanks to chytrid fungus. We saw the golden toad that got wiped out within a month because of chytrid fungus. And the Panamanian golden frog, which actually technically is a toad, common names are funny like that sometimes, where they're like, it looks like a frog. Well, it's technically a toad. Well, we'll stick with the frog name. Was a national symbol for Panama. So they were getting very desperate. And AZA sent down facilities and have been a big part of saving them, along with the governments down there as well. And that's also the cool thing with AZA, is they help, as well as the facilities themselves, have relationships with governments around the world.
That's awesome.
I also always love when I do talk about a lot of the exotic animals, about house cats and dogs, especially house cats, because everyone's had an interesting story with a house cat. And it's because everyone assumes that when an animal is in captivity, it's domesticated. And the term domesticated comes from us humans breeding the animal and not letting nature take its course. So secretly, it's really a lot about inbreeding and choosing
Yeah.
genetics and all that sort of stuff. And the reason why I use the house cat a lot is I'm like, it took 5,000 years to get that. Okay. And let's be real. Sometimes they're always not the most domesticated animal. So, yeah, if you have 5,000 years to spend, want to inbreed some stuff and most likely destroy the species it's coming from. Yeah. But yeah, so house cats are a great example of it. Dogs, and actually one of the first domesticated animals technically apparently was the reindeer.
Really?
Yeah, there's some evidence apparently that shows that reindeer were, and they're not as separate as their wild cousins per se. I mean, we did a lot more work on dogs and cats, but there's some argument between certain people that reindeer actually were a human companion before some of the other species. Also,
That's
they've recently
interesting.
discovered that cats might have domesticated us before we domesticated them, that they're the ones that made the initial steps into building a relationship, which is probably why they have a side of arrogance to them. Like, good humans, you're actually our pets. We've tricked you these 5,000 years to rub our bellies, feed us, and we can scratch you and you clean up our poop.
Shh, don't
Yeah.
say that too loud.
Oh yeah, I don't want to cause an uprising.
He'll run with it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense
Yeah.
because cats definitely, they've got it good, the house cats.
Oh yeah.
They've definitely worked the system.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, cats are probably one of the biggest devastators to wildlife around the world.
Oh,
So house
really?
cats perfectly fine, but Australia, huge problems there with people just letting their cats outside or just feral cats running amok. Lost millions of native birds and mammals and reptiles here in North America, but Australia has it worse. And I do talk about it a little with the episode, the brush-tailed baton or mushroom-loving marsupial episode, where a lot of cats have something called toxoplasmosis. I mean, not every single cat, but it's something that can survive in their stomach. It's a parasite, does okay, and cats actually survive pretty well without it, but comes out in their poop. And a lot of animals don't do as well with it. And one of the worst ones are marsupials. It is deadly to marsupials.
wow.
And that's because marsupials, for the most part, have, sorry, going to say the E word, evolved away from a lot of other animals. And that's because the marsupials were on Australia, and marsupials were kind of the main mammal at that time. Australia broke away. And then what we call placental mammals, us and most mammals out there, kind of then took over the rest of the world, but we couldn't get really to Australia. So that's why Australia is full of all these kind of older aged animals, and you don't see many marsupials because they actually think that marsupials originated in North America and then migrated down through South America to Australia, and then Australia broke apart and then everything got wiped out, and then eventually one of the possums that could survive in South America moved up to North America again, and then we got our one marsupial back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're real cute too. I love them.
Possums.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the big one is disease with them, but then also just wiping out tons of animals all over the place. So if you do have a cat and you think it needs to go outside, do a catio.
Oh no.
Nope.
No,
Or
no.
not even that. I mean, just leave it inside too.
We don't even like our cats to look out the. I mean, we let them look out of one window, but they're not allowed outside.
There's too many coyotes.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you guys have a lot of coyotes out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I took my tiny little 6-pound dog out to go to the bathroom early Sunday morning. And as we were walking back in, just saw the coyote like running along the fence like 10 feet away.
Yeah.
And it was like, they're so pretty though. I love them. I took the dog in and then went back out and tried to find it, but it was gone already. But yeah, we've got them all over.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, it's one of those where the animal that could solve the coyote problem is one that humans fear more than coyotes, but coyotes are probably more bold, would get into things more, and that is wolves. Wolves got replaced by coyotes. Coyotes are a little more in your face and all that sort of stuff, and would possibly see a small dog or something as an option. They're very optimistic hunters, where wolves are like, I don't want to eat that. That's too small for me. I'm going to go after the deer or the elk or a bison or something like that.
or the child, or the woman jogging down the street.
Well, for the most part, they're actually pretty scared
They're
animals.
scared, yeah.
Yeah, they're very scared. We have there's a species of wolf, and it's considered one of the most endangered canids of the world, and it's in North Carolina, and it's called the red wolf. And it's not. It's bigger than a coyote, but people do mistake it for a coyote. But unlike a coyote, they've done tons of studies on these guys, and they don't want to go after people, dogs, anything like that. For the most part, they eat rabbits and squirrels. That's all they want to eat. They're very skittish, and they don't really grow into big packs. It's like one male, one female, their kids, and then their kids kind of move out. But there's only like one little spot in North Carolina that is left to this wild population of red wolves.
Wow. Are they in captivity anywhere, or is it just kind of just this one?
Oh, yeah. I know North Carolina Zoo is definitely one of the biggest breeders of them, and they currently have the SSP coordinator, or the species survival plant person, for the red wolves. And then there's a number of other facilities, AZA and non-AZA, working together to have a very healthy captive red wolf population. And there have been some captive red wolves released and successfully living out into the wild now. So they are part of an active release program through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services.
That's really cool.
That's cool.
How many of these, like I know, like is it the white rhino, the one that's more endangered? I can't remember of the rhinos.
I can't remember.
They keep switching it now so much, because there's white rhinos, but they were like, oh, there's northern and southern. And unfortunately, you see it all the time where once it becomes like, originally they really like to try and keep the different like north or south white rhinos separate, but then all of a sudden when you see the population shrink down, they're like, they're all white rhinos now, we just need white rhinos. There's not enough to be that picky, we just need white rhinos. At one point I think there was like all these different subspecies of ocelot and jaguar and all that, and they're just like, no, they're just jaguars now and ocelot now, we can't be that picky, even though there are some like physical differences between like the ones found in northern Mexico and all that down to Brazil, that there are some differences, but they've had to not be as picky. But fun fact, if you ever look at a rhino and you can't find the sign and you're trying to decide if it's a white or a black rhino, look at the lips. Sounds kind of sexual, but look at their lips. Black rhinos are more browse grazers or leaf eaters, so they have a prehensile lip. So they have a little triangle upper lip, and then the white rhinos are kind of more the grass grazers. So it's kind of big old pouty lips, so to speak, to them. So yeah, if you ever are at a zoo, although a lot of times you'll see just a big butt of a rhino and might not see their face all the time, but yeah,
I got to feed a black rhino.
Yeah.
For my birthday, I went to the zoo and got to feed a rhino, and it had the
little triangle lips.
Yeah.
There's some facilities out there that have them. One thing they do really cool is some animals participate in paintings. So a lot of these paintings then we can use to sell to the public as just another way to earn money for conservation. So one of the highlight ones is black rhinos are really good at it because they have a little lip that they can kind of dip into the paint and just paint around on it.
Yeah.
But I do have to say the number one animal I've worked with that is just an excellent painter is a white-nosed coati. So they're like part of the raccoon family down in Central and South America. There's a couple, like there's like the brown-nosed coati and the white-nosed coati, and they're really about scent. And they like to self-anoint their tails a lot of time. But yeah, so a little raccoon animal, but they kind of have like a ringtail kind of tail to them and an elongated nose. And if they get a scent that's really interesting to them, they'll dip their tail into it. So you could lay out, and so it's enrichment. And that's the thing, is all of this is all voluntary. It's enrichment or training practice, so to speak, because most of the training is all welfare. It's like not jumping on balls or something like that.
Yeah.
But so the coati will literally dip his tail into the paint and then just start smearing it all over the canvas and making a whole big mess. So then the next step is bringing out a pool of soapy water and having him go in there, because also the soap is really intriguing for him. So he goes in and starts self-anointing and able to clean himself. And that's not really we had to teach him. It's just he was really into scents, and that's how he would react to it.
That's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen one of those. I'll have to look it up.
No, I haven't either.
I think I've seen it a lot on TikTok and stuff where there's a famous video where they reverse the coatis backwards and it looks like little brachiosauruses because they have their little tails up. You might have seen it, might have not, where, they a lot of times when they're walking around, their tails are up with a little kind of loop. So like if you walk it backwards, it looks like little brachiosaur dinosaurs walking because they travel in little groups.
I'm going to have to look that up. Have you ever worked with an okapi?
Never worked with okapi, but have met okapis plenty of times. I've worked with giraffe, which are okapi's cousins, but definitely have to say okapi are very cool animals.
So my friend wanted me to ask you, is it soft? It's her favorite animal ever. She just wants to know if it's soft.
So the only reason why I got to touch it, because most of the time we don't, is I was helping out with like a injection training thing. So it was distracted and, you were just kind of like using a blunted needle. So a needle that we just cut off the sharp end. And it feels like velvet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. Kind of. Giraffes have kind of a similar fur to them, but it's normally covered in saliva. They drool a lot. They're big lickers. All day what they do out in the wild is they're licking little leaves off of these big thorny trees. And also, if you didn't know, the reason why giraffes have those black tongues is because their tongues are out so much. It's so they don't get sunburned.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Yeah.
The animal kingdom is amazing.
Yeah. And that's actually, so because of that, a lot of keepers have to find things that are actually mouth active for giraffe to do throughout the day, because like we don't have giant piles of trees with thorns that they're picking little leaves off. They get very nutritious diets in captivity, so they don't need to eat the same amount. They're more calorie dense. And so one of the things, a buddy of mine at my last facility, he was really good at making these, which were giraffe mouth fidget spinner things, where it would be a board and you'd have to use you'd use stainless steel metal because giraffe's saliva so much, you don't want anything to leach. And it would have like kind of locking mechanisms, hinges, all stuff very secure onto this board, but all things that could move and spin. And like a mobile bop it or fidget spinner, if you will. And the giraffe could sit there and just play with this toy all day because he's full, but he's like, I should be licking something, shouldn't I right now? So it gives him the opportunity to keep on licking.
That's awesome. So we've almost gone an hour, so we will let you go soon. But before we do you have any stories of anything just crazy or weird that happened to you while you were on the job?
How about this? I'll tell you the first time I ever had an interaction with an animal that at the facility I was at was considered a code red animal, which is kind of the highest level of danger. Now, this was not a jaguar or anything like that. You wouldn't be going in with that. But it was a bighorn sheep. And I was like fresh zookeeper kind of status at this point. I'm not going to lie. And I was kind of just getting started. And my curator at the time is, let him see a code red animal up close. Get him on in there. Get that experience, kind of. He was kind of the guy that would throw you in the deep end of the pool to teach you how to swim kind of guy.
Yeah.
But it worked. So it was a bighorn sheep. And I clearly remember it. So because the keeper that was training me at the time, she was like, all right, we're going to go in. Here's your shovel. We're going to go around. We're going to rake up. We're going to be very mindful of the male Ajax. Okay. He's top guy. All right. He's very territorial. A lot of times he's going to leave you alone, but just keep an eye out on him. And I remember, I'm like, okay. And she's like, also the plastic shovels, just in case he comes at you. I'm like, well, that's not going to help me whatsoever, but cool. It's more for a shield, but yeah, it's not like we're going to hit the animal or anything. It's just as a shield, just to block them. And I remember stepping in, and Ajax comes up to his little pile of rocks because there's a big pile of rocks there. And I remember him just staring at me and being like, this guy's new and I'm going to show him what I'm going to do. And then he would look at me, slam his head as hard as he could into a rock, and then look at me and then slam his head into the rock and then look at me. And he's like, you see this? This rock is what I'm thinking of doing to you right now. And that's just bighorn. They do it out in the wild when they see another bighorn where they're like, I'm going to slam my head into this rock like a gym bro. He's like, yo, man, check this out. I could mess you up if you want. So, yeah, that was my first experience. He never really did anything. And I got to laugh at the new mail that we got once Ajax was an older boy and he eventually passed on. But the new one, Dodge, was the complete opposite. Dodge would slowly walk behind you if he had grain, and you would look behind him and he would fairy boy away. He'd be like, "Oh, you scared?" Like he would like walk up and forget that you were that close, and you'd be like, "Dodge, what are you doing?" "Oh!" And just like fairy boy across the exhibit. I'm like, whoa, this is a very different animal. And a great example of how just because an animal is supposed to act one way, there's a lot of different personalities even between the same species.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know when people are like, "The animals don't have feelings or personalities." Like, have you ever been around an
Yeah.
animal? Because
Yeah, they do.
They do.
Oh yeah, there's some that plot. There's some that have a kind of a snarky attitude about them. I don't care. Some a little
Mhm.
hyper, and yeah, there's a lot of different behaviors. And I gotta say, there's a lot of behaviors in reptiles. They have a lot of passion and a lot of brains. Some of them are way smarter than some of the animals. And I always tell people if when I was like near sand cats or something like that, and they're like, "Oh, don't you want to cuddle them?" I'm like, "Ma'am, I trust the snake over there a lot more than I touching that cat right now." So yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty like the sand cats, even though they're like small and cute, they're like pretty brutal, aren't they?
Oh yeah. They're about 2 times stronger, so 2 times stronger of a bite than any house cat, 2 times stronger in muscle. So it's like a dense muscle. It's like a chimp. A chimp's way stronger than us, but
Yeah.
it doesn't look like it should be. It's just
Yeah.
because of denser muscle. And I mean, it's all about survival. So
Yeah.
without it, they couldn't survive. And one of my favorite facts with sand cats that I think really clear the picture for most people is they go after venomous snakes. I mean, for a lot of them, it's their only option of food out in the wild. I mean, if you ever watch Lawrence of Arabia or any of those movies where it's just sand dunes and nothingness, that's their home. They don't have many options. So they
Yeah.
have to go after venomous snakes. And yeah, if a snake does nick them real good, that could cause them to die. Sometimes the prey wins out there.
Yeah.
And the major thing that sandcats have is they can literally punch the snake so hard in the back of their head, it'll knock it out. And that's how they can then safely eat it.
I want
So,
a
yeah, I
sandcat.
mean, yeah, they got some power behind them. And even though I work with sandcats and they're like, yeah, hey, man, don't touch me. I'll shred you up, and
Yeah.
that's as good as you can get with a sandcat. And I wouldn't want it any other way because you never know.
Yeah.
Genetically down the line, I don't want to mess up any sort of all of a sudden they teach their kids how not to act and then they teach them, and you could really mess up genetically or even psychologically something that gets passed down that will hinder them then if they get released back into the wild.
Yeah.
Aren't sandcats considered one of the most deadliest cats because their hunt to kill ratio? Is that what I saw? I think I saw it somewhere. Their hunt to kill ratio is higher than any other cat.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so there's a little arguments between them and the black-footed cat, which is also a very small African species of cat. But the sand cat is pretty much 70% successful. So if it sees
Wow.
something, there's a 70% chance that it will catch it and kill it. As a
Wow.
comparison, lions are only 30%.
Oh
And,
wow.
they're much bigger. They have huge amounts of grass, but there's a lot more food options out there. But they also are normally hunting in like prides of 10. But the
Yeah.
sandcat is normally by itself. But also, when you're in the desert and food is also your only source of water because they get most of their hydration from food. In captivity, we obviously give them water bowls and they do drink from it. Although I have worked with a sandcat that likes to just splash the water out like a jerk every day. And I'm just like, "Oh, buddy, he's special. He's a special boy." But they need it for hydration as well. So that food is even more important than it would be for a lion.
I could keep you on here for hours talking about animals, but
Well, yeah.
I won't do that to you.
Well, you can always ask me questions. I'm always, I mean, that's why I started the podcast is I just love talking about animals. And even though I talk about animals all day at work, I'm like, well, I can keep on talking and I'll record it and throw it out there for the world.
I mean, I'll have to say, like, as far as our guests and stuff are concerned, we very rarely get ones that love what they do and love their
Yeah.
job.
I wonder
So
why.
Yeah.
it's very refreshing. Like we've had a few, but most of them it's people bitching about crappy situations and stuff. So it's very nice and refreshing to talk to someone who loves what they do
Yeah.
and obviously has a passion for what they're doing. So thank you so much for joining us and talking animals with us.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. You guys were my first, so happy to help.
Woo-hoo.
And always excited to talk about animals whenever you need to.
I'm just gonna be like, hey Eric, what about this one? Okay, wait, before you go. Before you go, what about sloths? Have you ever worked with sloths?
A bit, yeah. I wasn't like a main keeper of them, but I did work a lot with sloths. Sloths can be secretly one of the biggest jerks of the animal world.
Really?
Yeah, there's some pretty
Slow jerks.
Yeah, well, they can move fast when they're being mean.
Ah.
Yeah, there's some great sloths out there, but yeah, there's also some other ones where I know keepers that will be like working and all of a sudden they look behind them and a sloth is slowly about to try and bite them in the back or something like that.
Jeez.
Just because they think it's fun,
Yeah.
So but there a lot of them are really great, and there's way more sloth species out there than you'll see in captivity. Like there's not I don't know if there's any outside of its natural range at this point, but there's something like pygmy sloths out there and all that.
Oh, wow.
But they're pretty much just down in that region because of how bad they're doing.
Yeah.
But they're doing well enough that people don't want to take them out. Like with certain conservation stuff, they'll come in, they'll evaluate, and they're like, oh no, we just have to like buy up this land, which we have the money for, set up some rangers, and we can keep the population growing in this region. There's no need to take it out. It's a lot of times in the desperate situations where like, there's no way we're stopping chytrid fungus, and you can put up a fence, but a fungus is going to get right through it, or there's only 7 left, and there's like no black-tailed prairie dogs around here, so yeah, we need to take them now, kind of deal.
Okay. No more questions. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we sign off, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find your podcast.
I'm pretty sure pretty much everywhere. I'm pretty sure even if you tell your Alexa to play Eric Likes Animals podcast, it will do it at this point. So, of course, Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, all that. I think the only one I never got on was Pandora, but I did try to, but it was very confusing or whatever if it was on or not. I still get emails as if I am, but I have no account, so I can't really check. So if someone does have an account, let me know if I'm on there or not. But I'm pretty much everywhere else.
Awesome. And we'll link to that in our show notes as well, so everyone can easily find you and go listen. And I think that's it. So again, thank you so much for coming on. We're glad we could be your first guest appearance.
I love you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Too soon, I know.
Well, we love you too. Don't worry. All right. Thank you so much. Everybody go listen to Eric Likes Animals, and we'll be back next week.
That's right. Bye, fuckers.
Bye, fuckers.
Thanks for listening to the Fuck My Work Life podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please consider rating us on your favorite podcast platform. We love to hear your workplace stories, so send them our way to fmwlpod@gmail.com or leave us a message at 310-818-3273. For more fun content, follow us on TikTok, Threads, and Instagram at FMWLPod. You can also chat with us and your fellow fuckers on our Discord channel. You can find all our links in the show notes. Until next time, bye, fuckers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could call ourselves zookeepers with our 3 cats and 1 dog. Very loose term.
That's our albino white tiger baby.
He's the podcast.
The almighty 2 feet of him.
Yes.